I'm Norm Poltenson, the publisher of the Business Journal, and I'd like to share with you a recent editorial I wrote entitled Meds and Eds, the Basis of U.S. Prosperity. In the editorial, I started out by talking about a phrase that Vladimir Lenin used in 1922 called commanding heights. And by that, he was referring to control of the economy, and that the Communist Party had control over the electrical generation, heavy manufacturing, mining, and transportation. Every economy has commanding heights, and today in the U.S. economy, we have meds and eds, which is a euphemism we use for medical care and for education. If you want to know just how big it is, go back for a period of 18 years, from 1990 to 2008, and just look at the job growth in the U.S. The service industry, as we would call it, has grown from 88 million to almost 115 million jobs. Tremendous growth. The heavy manufacturing, or the trade industry, or what we would call those people who make something, grew by barely 1 million jobs during that same period. Healthcare alone represented 25% of all of that growth, and government represented another 15%, which means 50% of all of the job growth during that 18-year period came from healthcare and from government. Now, I say government because that's the official term that's used, but 70% of that figure has to do with education. Real wage and salary growth during the same 18-year period was driven again by meds and eds that represented 75% of all the wage growth. So what drives the cost of our health care and of our education today? We clearly have inelastic demand, which means that people simply want more of it regardless of what the cost is. We have two industries that are labor intensive and not prone to efficiencies. But the biggest driver of cost happens to be government involvement. In healthcare, consumers pay barely 10% of the cost of their healthcare. The government picks up 50% through direct pay in Medicare and Medicaid, and picks up the tax loss by the exemption that corporations get, which represents more than 35% of all the healthcare costs in the country. Obviously, state governments are major supporters of public universities, and the tuition rates are subsidized by tax dollars. The federal level, just look at the Pell Grants in the Obama administration's proposal for this coming year, $40 billion of subsidies. So that's what's driving the demand side. On the supply side, what's interesting in meds and eds is something we call credentialing. Now, in the real world, in the manufacturing world, in the service industry world, what we're driven by is getting the job done and output and production. We're concerned about profit. In the credentialing world, you're paid based on how many sheepskins you have or how many certificates you have, and it doesn't matter whether it's healthcare or education. It's not by what you actually produce. Somewhere along the line, society has to ask the question, what's the value that we're getting for the expenditures? Nobody argues in healthcare that we have not made tremendous advances and that our lives are better for it. But we also have studies, for example, a Dartmouth Atlas of Healthcare study done recently on Medicare expenditures all over the country, and the variations in expenses were enormous, but the outcomes didn't seem to make much difference. Is it possible that all of our advances really are not attributable to healthcare? How about the consumers who simply had better nutrition? I look at the nutrition that we had when we were kids growing up and the fatty foods that we ate. Look at the safer workplaces that employers have today. Look at the better sanitation, and look at a better educated citizenry when it comes to healthcare. On the education side, what do we know? We know one thing. If you have college education, you earn more money than if you don't have college education. But outside of that one statement, what is it that we really know about causal relationships between spending money and getting results? In 2006, we know that the U.S. spent 40% more per student than 34 other industrialized nations. And for that largesse, what have we received? Below average scores in science, math, and reading. It's pretty clear that policymakers are driving meds and eds and not consumers. We need consumers to make decisions. We need market forces that are introduced. And this takes me back to commanding heights and Vladimir Lenin. Today, meds and eds, they are the commanding heights in our new economy as we go forward. And whoever controls that will have the key to whether the United States is prosperous or not prosperous, whether the GDP grows at the sluggish rate we're now experiencing, or whether we go back into the 3 and 4 and 4.5% growth rates that have sustained us for decades. It's a vital, critical focus that we need to have on who controls the commanding heights. And if society doesn't take it seriously, then we may well end up with continuing government control and the resulting sluggish economy. Thank you.